The wizarding world of Harry Potter has pushed the idea of the house fairy into the modern mainstream consciousness, but it has been in the shadows of human awareness for quite some time. As I discussed in the last episode, Haunt, Sweet Haunt, accounts of beings in the home space have been around nearly forever. The opening clips are claimed to be real recordings of house fairies taken within the last 15 years. Although the film quality could perhaps use improvement, and some people may say that the blurriness either lends to or damages the credibility of the claims, it is potential evidence, if nothing else. For as long as people have had houses, they have apparently also had house elves and house fairies. They are called many names and with many distinctions in many cultures. In Scotland, we have the brownie. These are typically said to be under 2 feet tall, with wrinkled brown skin and large noses, rather similar to Dobby in the Harry Potter world actually, and apparently they have the power to shapeshift. They hide during the day, in the walls and or other liminal spaces, it is asserted, and come out at night to clean and mend when the human family has gone to sleep. Older accounts say that they enjoy sitting by the fireplace and use horseshoes as little seats. This I find fascinating because typically iron is legendary in keeping fairies away. I do suspect, however, that this alleged ironclad method of repellent is not indeed ironclad, for I believe that individual and family genetics of the fairy in question determine the response to iron, much as metal allergies run in some human individuals and families. It is within the old lore that brownies turn into boggarts when angered. Here again, we see a separate ego, it seems, as I've discussed in the episode Imaginary. The Bantee is the Irish variant of a brownie. These are sweet fairies who live in a household and help with the chores. The difference between the Bantee and the brownie is the sex and or gender. The Bantee is female or presents as such. Bantee translates to woman of the house. She's typically wearing shabby clothes with a wrinkly face and standing no taller than a few feet. She helps with household chores and guards children and animals in the house. The Scottish have their brownie, the Irish the Bantee, and the Slavs the domovoy. The domovoy are hearth fairies. They are loyal, strong protectors of the home as long as they are fed and happy. The domovoy are allegedly a type of elf who live in the hearth's flames, shapeshifters appearing as little women, men, cats, cows, or pigs. They sometimes are also called the old men of the house, and are believed to be an ancestor's spirit. In some renditions of the lore, the oldest person would need to be the first to enter the new home, and would be the first to die, which would transform them into the home's domovoy. Interestingly enough, there are dozens of historical claims that human people can, and do, sometimes become fae upon physical death. I do speak about this in further detail in both episodes Missing and Dear, respectively. I agree that this is likely because I believe that death and brushes with it transform a person in ways not yet understood by humanity. Unfortunately, I lack the time and the energy to detail every type of recorded house fairy, as there may be indeed hundreds. But generally speaking, there are some considerable perks and risks to having a house fairy. They are said to help with chores mainly, as well as to return lost items, to mend clothing, bring fortune and opportunity, to protect the home and all within from a multitude of ill encounters. Some may act as a genie, too, imparting wisdom and creativity upon human companions. This word is where we got the word genius, after all. They may enchant food in order to enhance its freshness, taste, or longevity, or to keep the home free from pests. On the other hand, if neglected, disrespected, or angered, they may turn against their human companions, making large messes, tearing up clothing and spoiling food, physically attacking and otherwise tormenting the offender, bringing bad fortune, interrupting sleep, hiding or destroying important items. Legends are one thing, but what about real-life experiences today?
Was knitting alone in the backyard and watching the birds eat out of the feeder. I was out there for probably about 30 minutes when suddenly I heard like a popping sound. And the only way I could really describe the sound is by comparing it to those little white poppers that are thrown to the ground for the noise to be made. And I looked up from my knitting and I realized that this strange sound came from the middle of the tree I was sitting next to. And I looked up at the tree in confusion, and what I saw falling from the tree branch was more mind-boggling than this elusive popping noise. What looked like thin silvery paper was spiraling down from the branches to the ground below. And I got up from my chair for a closer look. And I was close enough to reach out and touch these shiny flakes. However, I seemed to not be able to do so. Like I knew I really was not supposed to touch them. As I watched these little flakes hit the earth, they just all dissipated right in front of me. After this is when my husband and I really noticed odd things that seemed to be happening at night. The mail we tossed on the coffee table is neatly stacked and sorted by the next morning. And the clean socks that I leave in heaps are folded up in the laundry room. The dog's bowl is cleaned and filled with food and fresh water. All these things were really odd, but rather enjoyable actually. One point of particular fixation was my knitting basket, is where I keep all my materials and supplies. And times when I got my yarn tangled up in impossible knots, I would just discard it out of frustration. And then I would wake up the next morning, the yarn would be rolled up in a ball and my tools were all put away nicely and neatly. And also all the scraps of yarn left over from my projects would be gone. The longer this went on, I grew more suspicious that we were not living alone anymore in the house. I brought it up to my husband, and to my surprise, he agreed with me. A while after we came to this realization that we had something that was living in our house and tending to chores at night, he went away out of town for a few days, and this really seemed to upset the brownie. In the spare room, I heard a series of soft thuds and clamor when he was gone. And one night I went into the room to investigate, and I only found a bunch of party supplies and extra tablecloths tossed all over. At first, I figured it was only gravity at work. So I put everything back where it was and where it went. As I went back to the kitchen, I heard the same clamor as before, and I went back into the spare room and once again found it a mess and cleaned it up once again. And this occurred 2 more times before I finally went to bed. And I'll admit, this actually rather scared me. When he got home, things went back the way it was for the most part. Some nights things were not tidied up at all, and other nights everything was put back as it was before. And this went on and off for a while until one day I was in the kitchen making some bread. And actually out of the corner of my eye I saw a streak of red and brown run from around the corner and towards the fridge. I jumped at the sudden activity in my kitchen, of course, and I spun around towards the fridge. and was stunned at what was peeking at me from behind the refrigerator. A figure about 14 inches in height was staring back at me, almost in complete awe of what he was experiencing. He wore a burnt red hat on his head that was roughly the size and shape and color of a potato. He had small wrinkles all over his face, and his eyes seemed to be too big for his face. The nose and mouth were in proportion to his head and body. This little sprite wore all brown, thin cloth, and I really couldn't see his feet as they were behind the fridge. Without thinking really, I rushed towards the little figure, and he jumped a bit and turned around and ran behind the refrigerator, which I then pulled out of the fridge quite quickly and with little effort in my excitement. When I got the fridge to the middle of the kitchen, I found nothing. It appeared that the brownie had left my home, and really he hasn't come back since. I think I offended and frightened him. I hope he comes back one day. Thank you.
I think that it is a good step that she is able and willing to acknowledge that her behavior and strong emotional reaction may have frightened and or offended him away. It is my belief that the Fae are individuals to one point or another, and that to react with extreme emotion purely because one is meeting a non-human person is a type of objectification that most of the Fae seem to find intimidating, dangerous, or annoying. I would suggest that if you do meet a fairy person, it is wise never to comment on their genetics or the physical expressions of such, like facial features, size, skin color, etc., or to ask them to perform magic for you, or attempt to corner, harass, chase, or capture my brief encounter with an elf. Everything I am going to tell you is true. I believe in magic and mysteries, but I didn't expect to find an elf in my face. One night, many years ago, I think it was between the years 2009 to 2011, I was between 20 and 22 years old. I was on my computer at night, and I was curious to see things about mysteries on the internet. I found a page with themes of magic and magical animals. There was a phrase for being friends with an elf. I read it out loud, and nothing happened. It was 10 p.m. At about midnight, I went to sleep. So, 1:30 a.m., I was sleeping and I opened my eyes, and I saw how something was pulling up the duvet with which I was covering myself so as to not be cold that night. That something was about 20 centimeters tall, and it was on top of my mattress. I couldn't see it very well since all of this happened in half a second and it was all dark, but there was definitely something very close to my face, covering me with the duvet to my neck. Instinctively, I covered myself with the duvet and I started hitting the inside of it to try to get rid of the thing that scared me. I, in there, super scared, took courage and quickly lowered the duvet to my hips and turned on a small television that I had near my feet in order to light the room. When the TV was on, I looked around the room and saw nothing. I was still in a state of panic and said out loud, quote, "I don't want to see anyone else, any elves or goblins," unquote. Since that night, nothing has appeared in my room. 2 years later, however, I heard that my brother, who slept in a nearby room, he told me that he had seen out of the corner of his eye an elf, small and dark, running from his closed door to the also closed window. He also said that this happened in a split second. All of this happened around 2 or 3 a.m. I asked him when it happened. I did the math, and I think it was the same day and night that I kicked that poor elf out of my room to never see him again. From the looks of it, elves can walk through doors and windows. Gnomes haunted my aunt's house. This took place in the 90s. I would frequent my aunt's house where my cousins lived, and she told me that if I saw gnomes, to not be afraid, that they are just mischievous little guys. I was confused and slightly afraid by her just coming out and saying that, but a few hours there and I realized why. I kept seeing very short people with beards and pointy hats running around the corners. I saw one scurry down the staircase, run around my aunt's room and around the kitchen corner as well. The sightings were mere seconds, as they were definitely just messing with everyone in the house and didn't really want to be caught. My sister saw one sitting on the kitchen countertop. He was staring straight ahead, not moving, probably trying not to be seen, still as a statue. It was so bizarre. Some mornings my aunt said that she would wake up and some furniture would be moved, like they had pushed it around at night. So strange. I think it had to do with my uncle's strong German heritage. I read that gnomes are from the old land, and I think his strong family ties may have something to do with their presence. Either way, it was always an interesting experience to visit. Are gnomes a documented occurrence? I saw a post about someone's daughter seeing little people. A few of the comments mentioned gnomes. I could have sworn that as a child I've seen gnomes in my windows. Shadows of gnomes, but always in the curtains. A few of them. They'd disappear when my parents would enter the room. With all of the worldwide legends and the current accounts, if house fairies and brownies are real, how then to keep them happy, healthy, and motivated? A central tradition is to regularly provide food offerings. Did you know that in some cultures, Santa Claus is an elf? The notion and the tradition of food offerings for the Fae is where we get the classic Christmas Eve gift of milk and cookies for Santa, actually. I find this charming and endearing. It is in truth one of my very favorite pieces of lore. For year-round fairies, though, some preferred offerings are typically fresh cream, butter, bread, milk, honey, and or water. Why these, though? In many fairy legends, human-made cream, milk, butter, and bread are especially prized. Though the Fae, who primarily live in a less physical dimension, tend to eat only the foison, or the essence of food here, I theorize that these foods are delicious and are rather heavy, rich, that they give extra physical energy with which to manifest. And they cannot make physical foods themselves because they are primarily in an overlapping, less physical dimension than this one. To me, it seems a happier, healthier, less stressful, and less energy-sapping strategy to complete simple, easy chores in one step, and to ask or require for those who benefit to provide the more complicated, energy-demanding treats in return. At least, this is my understanding, and if I were a brownie, this would be my strategy. According to many fairy legends, to eat the food of the fairies or to drink their liqueurs is to remain with them. What if, on a more temporary basis, this is also true when the Fae manifest with humankind in this more physical plane? I do contend that this is the case myself, and believe that foods, drinks, ointments, creams, anything absorbed into or ingested by one's body changes its vibration and traits, and therefore reality, however notable or unseen that change may or may not be. Is this idea really all that mystical, though? Do humans not take in medicinal creams for hormonal imbalances or eat specific foods for certain deficiencies? As well, there are pharmaceutical drugs and nutritional supplements that change the body and its state, are there not? In Joshua Cutchin's tome, A Trojan Feast, Joshua exposes the connections between non-human people, human people, food, and drink. He begins chapter 1, which is purely about fairy lore related to the food, with a quote from Fairy Tales, a work by Joseph Jacobs. And what you've not to do is this: bite no bit and drink no drop, however hungry or thirsty you are. Drink a drop or bite a bit while in Elfland you be, and you will never see Middle Earth again. On the subject of food, even the opening sentiment is a warning today. Even so, it is reported that fairy food offered to human people outside of the realm of the Fae is fair and fine to eat. I do concur that this is probably true, though I always advise that each person exercises their own discretion in any situation. In the final chapter of his book, Joshua continues on to say, quote, "My research has led me to propose the following hypothesis. Extraterrestrial, spiritual, or interdimensional intelligences which exist in other realms can interact with human beings by altering chemical compounds in the brain, leading to altered states of consciousness. If this is true, which I do believe, then why could it not also work in reverse, grounding the Fae and others here too?" If you've not heard of Joshua Cutchin and his books, I do suggest that you may well want to read them and to listen to his interviews. I find him to be a brilliant person, and I believe that he is if not the human person who is on the cutting edge of factual understanding in these matters. His most recent work, The Ecology of Souls, I regard as especially required reading, in fact, as well as his other non-fiction books. Apparently, each type of house fairy has a different temperament. Generally speaking, I think it is healthy to keep in mind that the Fae allegedly do have an exotic psychology compared to human people, and to approach any dealing with them in an air of cooperation, humility, accuracy, and objectivity. Please never, ever, ever give a fairy person or being any order, no matter how casually. This is seen as an attempt at enslavement, as I understand, because they use language literally and contractually. This may be, aside from breaking a promise or agreement, the biggest and most common offense. Both in classic retellings of fairy encounters of many classifications and in my own life, it has been suggested and recited, convincingly I shall add to my standards, that each type of the Fae have different social systems, morals, psychology, needs, and desires than those of human people. It seems to me that there are indeed some key differences, and also some happy compromises. Firstly, it may be wise to consider that many, if not all, of the neutral or friendlier fae seem to work on social contract. That is, that one's words are their bonds, and that ignoring, disrespecting, neglecting, breaking your promises to them, or making false promises is likely to send even the most loving fairy person into a rage. Here in this society, we have systems in place that require a notary and paper in order to make a contract binding, but this may not be the case in other societies. Secondly, I would highly suggest that instead of breaking or ignoring any agreement that you have made with, for, or towards any fairy person, one should approach them with humility and honesty about the situation in a timely manner and ask for respite from the agreement or a renegotiation of terms. This shows the other person that they are being considered, respected, and that the relationship is judged as being important enough for prioritization on equal terms. Never breathe or communicate a promise that you intend to break, or do not take deadly seriously. For the Fae, there is no such thing as a casual promise or a casual contract. Thirdly, my friends, I would like to offer that it may be a good idea and practice to adopt regular offerings to one's house elf, house fairy, or brownie, and or any other positive fae who is helpful. We have already covered the importance of physical food offerings at the beginning of this episode, but did you know that food comes in a myriad of forms and not all is purely physical? Energetic offerings are just as important. Time and again it is brought up that they require an attitude and regular thoughts of gratitude and happiness towards their efforts, investment, and or positive presence in one's life and home. If I am understanding properly, the Fae have much less of what is called short emotion than human people do, and they usually operate on longer or long emotion, meaning that unless provoked severely on their terms, they live a very even-keeled, low-grade emotional experience. Could this be part of why human people consistently feel the need to ask if they have souls? For the record, I believe that they do, and that they simply have a different expression of such than human people have, which human people have discounted or demonized because it is not their own. Nonetheless, the Fae, seemingly more intellectual, philosophical, more of the time than humans, perhaps this is why too, they are far more contractual in their relationships than loose and emotional, and perhaps why human people have often called them demons and or tricksters. And yet there is the saying that a fairy cannot lie. Perhaps the trouble is that a human being cannot listen. Either way, I always advise that human people work on honing their accuracy in communication. It is vital for one to say what they mean and mean what they say. Even myself, though I am speaking more generally and loosely here in my videos, I am only communicating this way because I am speaking to a human audience, and it pains me to communicate in this manner. But I do not wish to ward off listeners by appearing too boring or too detailed in my speech. If I were speaking as I normally do and or to a fairy listener, I would be adding explicit disclaimers to every applicable sentiment. Alas, My solutions to most human fairy problems are outlined above. And the final piece of such is to ask a fairy specifically what they want or need from you, and to ask them what more you can do for them, and regularly so, as well as on the other side of the coin, phrase your requests in the following format. My friend, I am having insert trouble here. Could you perhaps be so kind as to insert solution here? It would be incredibly helpful to me, and it would be dearly appreciated. To communicate with them, I suggest that you set out a food offering right before you ask them a favor. It should be in proportion to the favor you ask. Then sit across the room, clear your mind to a blank state, and when this is achieved, pose your request. I suggest remaining in that pose and state for a few moments, awaiting an answer, which will likely come in the form of telepathic communication, the tinkling of bells, or a small, unexpected bit of activity in the room. In asking a house fairy what more, or generally what they would like, need, or prefer from you, I recommend the same procedure minus the offering, since, depending upon the fairy, you may risk providing a less than ideal offering upon first meet or so. I have worked with the Fae rather intimately in the past, I do believe, and even today, one of my closest friends has a house fairy, he says. He says that they live in great harmony and that she has given him much, that in fact he owes his success, wisdom, and career to her, for she provided him the knowledge, creativity, and resources to entirely transform his life. Apparently, he provides an appropriate home, regular offerings, and a personalized relationship dynamic, and she acts as his genie in a variety of ways. Is this true? Well, who am I to say? What is real, anyway? Could it be that with all of these details, we see the result in being that an incredibly stable, communicative, well-managed, customized relationship dynamic is needed in order to maintain good standing with a fairy, especially a brownie or a home companion? It may be a lot of work for most people, communicating when and why a person must disrupt a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly schedule, or making sure that one gets out the high-quality food offerings on time, being in a perpetual state of gratitude for them, keeping one's emotions and emotional expressions via facial and body language at a lower level overall, in order to match the fairy companion, choosing words and agreements carefully, negotiating contracts if needed. Is it worth it? Would you ever have one?